Welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. Today we have a very special guest with us, a global business leader, a senior IT professional, and an author of two books, Tony Saldanha. Tony, a warm welcome to you.
Oh, thank you, Vivek. My pleasure.
Uh, you're dialing in from Cincinnati, I believe?
That is correct. Yes. I'm calling in from Cincinnati, where my family and I have lived on and off for
Mhm.
about 25 years. Yes.
Lovely. And I was just checking the temperature. It seems Bombay, the weather right now is the same as Cincinnati. It's 30 degrees on both sides. It's only 30 degrees Fahrenheit for you and 30 degrees Celsius for us. So that's the only little difference.
Yeah, you had me there when you said the weather is the same, but yeah, that's exactly right.
All right. So by way of a quick formal introduction, Tony graduated from IIM Lucknow in 1987, and post which he joined Tata Unisys in Mumbai, and then moved across to USA, where he worked with Unisys for a while. He then moved to P&G in 1991, and he stayed with them for 27 years. That was really a long stint, a great stint. He's been based out of Mumbai, Manila, Kobe, Singapore, Geneva, Cincinnati, and Boston, right? He was the CIO of Gillette during the acquisition of P&G in 2005 and led the IT integration services. And his last assignment at P&G was as a vice president, global business services, and next gen services. Tony is now the co-founder of Inixia, co-founder and the CEO, helping clients to professionalize and transform their business processes. And he's the author of two wonderful business reads. One, which is Why Digital Transformations Fail, and the second one, which is really about revolutionizing business operations, which he's co-authored with his longtime colleague, Filippo Passerini. I hope I got the name right, the pronunciation right.
That is correct. Thank you. Yes.
All right, great. So, Tony, I mean, it's been a spectacular journey. I was just thinking about it. IT has evolved over the last 3, 4 decades, right? From the mainframe to the PC revolution, to the internet, to the mobile revolution, to the data explosion, the whole outsourcing boom that happened that really benefited India, the big data, I would say the digital transformation, now AI. And you seem to be a part of this journey right from the start, right? So, what's your thought on that? I mean, when you reflect back, I mean, you've seen it all happen, right?
I think timing is everything. I was lucky to be in the middle of obviously what has been one of the fastest industry changes of all times. If you kind of think about it, um, 40 years ago, IT, or for that matter, shared services, was the back office or the back office, right? So,
Right.
if you wanted to close the books, you had a choice on whether you wanted to do that manually or you wanted to, run a few reports in some rented computer,
Right.
mainframe usually, somewhere. And so quite literally, even in P&G, the IT operations organization was in the basement of the
Mm-hmm.
headquarters in Cincinnati. So, yes, now to go from there to essentially being now associated, as the cause of the fourth industrial revolution to change every aspect of business, not just data, but how decisions are made and companies are run within a
Right.
very short period of time, 40 years. I think, you had to be born, I guess, and in the right years at the right time. But it's been wonderful to be part of this change.
Right. No, great. And when you think about this, Tony, what do you think has really changed in 40 years? And then what else that you see hasn't changed, fundamentally,
Yes.
when you reflect back on that? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So the short answer there is if you kind of unpeel the onion and kind of go layer by layer down, the root cause of what has changed has essentially been computing power, chip computing, right?
Right.
When you kind of think about AI, artificial intelligence, the algorithms, the mathematical formulas behind this have existed at least for 50 to 70 years, maybe even more, right?
Right.
Um, the only difference is that the massive data and the computing power to bring this to life was
Right.
not there. Um,
Right.
so, as a result of this, so let's build back the onion, so to speak. What has changed is essentially the way business processes, whether it is, bringing together information for reporting or sales or planning supply chains or, managing people from an HR standpoint, all of that's done differently because now you have information
Right.
and automation as a result of IT. So that's essentially what has changed. I mean, it's changed literally the core of how information is presented and decisions are made in every function in the company. And this is not just about companies. This is equally applicable to us, as general citizens. What has not changed and what is becoming even more critical are the human-related aspects of this. Because if you kind of think about it, at the end of the day, um, you know, um, change management, which is changing people's behaviors,
Right.
is still the largest challenge for most people. And it's become even more critical because, I mean, you can very quickly implement a software or a system or an IT program. The ability to win people along, to bring them to change behaviors and mindsets is still the challenge. And so that's really the difference between what has changed and what has not.
Right. So what I hear you say is really the computing power, the size of the data. I mean, that's of course exploded over the last 4 decades. But at the heart of all, it still is a human being that you're kind of working towards, right? I mean, trying to work with them, and therefore those challenges pretty much remain the same, right? In the midst of all this complexity. And that brings me to the next question. I'm sure that in your really stellar career of over 27 years at P&G, you've done multiple assignments. I would imagine the $57 billion acquisition of P&G, when the of by P&G of
Correct.
Gillette would have been one of those most challenging ones. And I believe you led the entire $10 billion integration of the IT services, if I've got that right. And and you did that in a short period of around 18 months, right? I mean, that would have possibly been one of the biggest challenge that you would have undertaken, right? Would love to hear, some of your thoughts about it, because largely because of two, three things. One, acquisitions are always very complex, extremely messy, but at the heart of it all, the biggest challenge is the whole cultural, alignment that needs to be done, of people. And, so would love to hear your thoughts on that. I think that itself could have been a full book from your side.
You're right on both counts. It could be a book on itself, and yes, it was one of the most challenging, at times in my career. So, for our listeners, a little bit of context.
Yeah.
In around 2003, 2004, Procter and Gamble acquired the Gillette company. So the Gillette company that makes not just the Gillette blades and razors, but also Duracell batteries and then Braun, appliances, including razors and mixies and so on and so forth. So the annual sales of Gillette was about $10 billion, and P&G did acquire it for $57 billion. I was one of the first people on the ground in Boston, which is the Gillette headquarters, as the interim CIO to lead the transition. So what made this interesting, Vivek, was that you're right, acquisitions and divestitures, but mainly acquisitions, are very tricky. In fact, the record on Wall Street is that most acquisitions fail to
Yeah.
deliver their synergies, their cost savings, or their sales growth. What Procter and Gamble had done at that time was made a commitment that as a result of these synergies, so you bring together, the IT organizations of P&G and Gillette, you bring together the finance organizations and, all of the business processes together. And because
Right.
of synergies and how well we do it together as opposed to separately, we would be able to save $1.2 billion, which was a pretty big challenge. And then on top of that, I think the company said, hey, we will do this all in about a couple of years or so. Now, that's challenging at a couple of levels. One is, that commitment to synergies essentially means that you're going to have to pretty much strip out and replace just about every system in a $10 billion company and replace it within, a year and a half, which is very, very
Right.
difficult.
Right.
My boss at that time, Filippo Passerini, actually, made another commitment. He basically said, hey, we will absorb the entire Gillette company and we will keep the IT headcount and budget flat. IT and GBS, IT and Global Business Services.
Mm-hmm.
So, imagine swallowing a $10 billion company and staying flat. And so that context obviously
Yeah.
made this a little more difficult. So, at the end of the day, we were able to actually do this in about 18 months. It was incredibly challenging. There were several people-related issues that we had to deal with, right? Because when you make a statement that says, we will keep the original headcount flat,
Yeah.
it means that you're going to have to find redundancy in a large number of the organization, which, by the way, did not mean that, we just fired all the Gillette people. It was a very, very data-based and a professional decision on what we called field the best team. So,
Mm-hmm.
you take the best people of P&G and the best people of Gillette, and they stay on. But then the issue then becomes, you have to do this while at the same time driving incredible change in both companies, because
Right.
at the end of the day, you're going to have to change the work processes and systems while
Right.
you are switching out the organization.
Right.
And that in particular, and going back to, our conversation about what, stays the same and what has, remained different as a result of IT, that was it, the organization piece. And that is
Right.
probably what made this, one of the most difficult times.
Fascinating. I mean, I'm sure there must be some really interesting and fascinating war stories from that whole 18 months of, I would imagine sleepless nights, lost weekends, and stuff like that, right? Uh, but moving along, and there's so many questions that are coming here. The people are asking about AI, people are talking about excellence, but I'll just try and stay, and I'm sure you'll kind of address all of them as we go along. So, in your first book, you talked about why digital transformations fail. And I think most of us think that they know what digital transformation is. Most of us know why we need it because it's obviously disrupting the world, and if you don't just change, you'll probably get it. But I guess the challenge with most of the people, and I think you've articulated that in your books, in that how do you go about doing that, right? And I think when I was going through this, I found this very interesting. What should I say? Forward, by your ex-boss, the now retired chairman and CEO, Robert McDonald, right? And he said in the opening line of the forward, and I just paraphrase it, like he said, how the hell, Tony, can Peter Arnett of CNN have a satellite dish in his briefcase, walking around all over Iraq, broadcasting the war to the entire world, and I can't even communicate with the warehouses that I have in Philippines, so so you can kind of imagine, that, I mean, that's the whole business problem that he kind of stated, right? I mean, the lack of connectivity, and I'm sure this is, of course, way back in '91 when we didn't have
Yes.
the advent of the connectivity and everything, but
Yes.
and I believe that basically propelled him to kind of focus on this whole digital transformation in phases in P&G, at least in his area. And I think you were responsible for this project Symphony, which kind of did this, right? So would love your thoughts about that, and maybe some of the experiences that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was an interesting, fascinating time. Bob McDonald, who went on to become the CEO of P&G, and then later on, he was uh, cabinet secretary of the Veterans Affairs Department under President Obama for the U.S.
Oh, okay.
government.
Mm-hmm.
So he and I were together during an assignment in the Philippines when he posed this famous question, and again, this was in the early 90s,
Yeah.
around distributor connectivity. So let me start with that incident, and then I will zoom out to talk about digital transformation, because I think that time was an illustration of why digital transformation succeed or fail, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm sure most of your listeners are way younger than I am, but for those of us that were around at that time, this was before the days of the internet, obviously, and even telephone connectivity within a country or within a city was somewhat, patchy. And of course, data transfer between, one location to another. If it wasn't floppy disks, then it was, very, very shaky. So What we were talking about was in a developing part of the world where sales was done through distributors, and distributors or stockists, as we may know them, in India, is they would take product from one company or multiple, and then they would go out and sell to small retailers, and they would perhaps go and sell out to others. And so the challenge for most companies is the minute you sell to a distributor, you lose kind of sight of the supply chain because
Right.
your distributors and the retailers may be loaded with your products, but you feel like you've sold them, so you're manufacturing more, and so on and so forth. But this is an information challenge, and how do you do that? So the lesson from a digital transformation standpoint is understanding that more than anything, information is king. And how you go about doing this is human creativity. So the idea that we had come up with at that time was, hey, why don't we actually give the software to run their own distributor businesses free
Mm-hmm.
to each of our distributors? So order, shipping, billing, finance, so on and so forth. They would buy their own PCs, but in return, they were supposed to send us data daily on core business parameters, right? So this was an investment from the company to the distributors, and what you were getting back was information. And that kind of, if I zoom out now, is the core of the information revolution and digital transformation. When we think about digital transformation today, and if you ask 50 people, Vivek, what digital transformation is, you're still likely to get, maybe 51 different answers on what it is, because it can be everything from, oh, it's this AI stuff to, it's my software, which I'm selling to you, and I'm using digital transformation as a buzzword, to getting you to buy it. But at the core of it, it is basically, doing your business differently using technology, which is a combination of course, technology, but it is not technology. It is, work processes, it is human behavior, and at the end of the day, it is outcomes. So the fourth industrial revolution is nothing more but the disruption of the way society works, whether it's social media or businesses like Procter and Gamble as a result of technology. No single piece of technology or program or AI is going to change the way everything works unless you also have the people and the outcomes that come along with it. And so what my book, Why Digital Transformations Fail, has done is just put this into perspective, stripping out all of the buzzwords and all of the hype of AI and technology to say, hey, look, if you're a successful company today and you change everything, your people, processes, technology, your relationships, to be still successful when the world changes tomorrow, then you are doing digital transformation. If you're doing anything else, if you're investing in AI and technology without taking care of the rest of the things, what you are doing is what I call innovation theater. It's almost like a movie. It's like a play. You think you're doing something, but you haven't changed the world around.
No, I think great points, Zach. And just to kind of pick up on your last point, you talked about we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. The first three, of course, being the steam and electricity and internet, right? And digital is right now, is something that we are front and center of at this point in time. I think somewhere you use this phrase, saying that digital is going to eat the world. It reminded me of Paul Graham's, iconic essay, which is "Software is going to eat the world." And pretty
Yes.
much, I think the way we define digital now, I mean, with AI and all of that, it's really going to eat the world in that sense, right? There's an interesting question here from Alicia. Just saying that how do you perceive the role of leadership evolving within the concept of digital transformation? Because you do have this challenge now that some of the senior professionals aren't necessarily people who've grown through the ranks like you have. You've had the good fortune of being in one of the most transformative industries, of your time, right? But there are people who probably come with the functions of marketing, maybe finance, and so on and so forth, right? What do you really think happens in such a scenario when the leadership is not able to grasp the essence of what needs to be done? I mean, what have you seen? Any reflections, any thoughts on that?
There are a couple of things. Firstly, I think part of the role that we all have as IT or business process leaders is to educate our leadership on the possibilities. Um,
Right.
one of the challenges that I find in most IT organizations is that we come from a backstory, the starting point where we were in the back office, and so we required people to tell us what to do. Hey, run this program or automate this, right?
Yeah.
But now that IT has become the center of the universe, so to speak.
Sure.
It's our job to essentially educate and tell people what's possible because it's not the
Mm.
CEO's job to understand the incredible potential of AI, or, for that matter, or digital transformation, right? Alicia's asking a great question. So there's a couple of things. One is, rather than getting frustrated because, your leaders don't understand technology or IT or AI, what I would say is that this is an opportunity for good people like, Alicia and others to shine because they can essentially be change leaders by educating not just themselves and their organizations, but their senior leaders. You have to talk about the art of the possible using digital technology. So that's what you do have to do. What else can senior leaders like CEOs and others do? They don't really need to understand how technology works.
Mhm.
All they need to do is to be open to the construct that it can be done differently
Right.
using technology, right? So I'll give you a really good and quick example. One of the pieces of disruption that we had worked on in this organization called Next Gen Services, which is, it's a little bit like, you and your listeners, Vivek, are familiar with Google X. This is the organization that does, driverless cars and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I had created a similar organization for the industry, but of course,
Hmm.
all in the very boring areas of shared services, which is finance and IT and so on and so forth. And one of the things we decided to disrupt was how travel and expense reporting is done in large companies. So today, Vivek, if you want to travel from, Mumbai to New York, you might go to your own organization and, you'd have your own travel agency and, you collect receipts and, create a travel expense report and stuff like that. Well, many IT companies and non-IT companies today, including Adobe and stuff, they don't do that. What they do is use data. So you go into a system and the system tells you, all right, Vivek, your travel budget is, so many lakh rupees. And at that point in time, you're free, to book wherever you want, to stay wherever you want, to eat whatever you want. If you have any expenses, you charge it to your company's card. And the data from the card actually generates the travel expense report. But then think
Right.
about the benefits, no negotiation, purchasing people, working deals. No offshore operation needing to, automate travel and expense reports and banking and stuff like that. And best of all, the employees happier because, they can get the best deal. They can, utilize whatever they want to do the right thing. And it's
Hmm.
great for the company because, when you empower employees to do the right thing, it actually saves you 10 to 15, anywhere from 15 to 35% of the travel budget, right? So it's a
Right.
win-win, but it's a huge change of everything. Now, is it the CEO's job to understand that data can replace all of the existing processes? They need to be open to it. It's our job to let them know that this is possible and how to go about doing this. So that's the best example I could give you on the
Right.
role of the CEO in a changing world.
Right. No, great points, Tony. And just kind of double clicking on the earlier question a bit. There's I think a very good, you could say, a follow-on question from Meera Chavan, and she just saying that with the rapid, pace of technological advancements, how do you recommend companies balancing innovation with maintaining stability? And I've seen some of this happen. When in early 2000 when I was with Microsoft, and I was in the enterprise sales business, and we had all these clients like Microsoft was churning out products every 18 months. I think with the exception of Vista, which was I think a disaster or something like that. But they were churning out 2000 XP and so on and so forth, right? But you know what? The clients didn't want it so fast, and we had a tough time just having the discussion with some of the MNC banks, like Citibank and all said, listen, you know what? Our stated strategy is going to be T minus two. I mean, you do what you want, but we're going to be two versions behind, right? So we saw a lot of this pushback, from the senior management, because they said, look, the new products aren't, up to speed. There's always a virus risk. There's all kinds of, other issue that happens, the stability is this and all that, right? So, we've always seen, it's possibly is the job of a CEO, or should I say the leadership team, to really think about innovation. But at the same time, they have to, kind of balancing it out with kind of stability and, some thoughts on that. And I'm sure you, as really running these massive businesses, services at scale, would in a way be the person pushing for change, and you probably have the HQ pushing back, right? I'm sure you would have encountered that. Any thoughts on that, Tony?
It is a balance. It's an excellent question and a really timely challenge, Vivek. And just to kind of provide more context on why this question is even more relevant in today's world than it is during other times. And then I will come back and answer the question. So just as context, Mira's question is really important today, more important today than it was, let's say, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because during times of industrial revolution, if you don't change quickly enough, then you get outdated, right? So, let's go all the way back to the second industrial revolution during the time when, internal combustion engines were replacing the horse carriage, right? The car, the automobile was changing the horse carriage. No amount of tinkering with or talking about, hey, I will use technology when it is ready. Prepared any of the horse carriage companies in the US or anywhere in the world to essentially become car companies, right? In fact, there's only one company, Packard Automobile, that successfully went from actually making coaches to making cars. And the reason for that is no amount of continuous improvement type of stuff on a horse carriage would give you the internal combustion engine. Right. You had to, of course, run your horse carriage business, but then have a small part of the company invested in innovation around this new technology. If you try to replace the entire horse carriage too soon, you would fail because cars are not ready. If you waited too long, then you were out of business. And so, your point is incredibly important during these times of change because it's not, whether or not, it's when. What's the right timing to do this? Right. And so then that gets to the question, which is, what do you do? Well, again, fortunately for us, there's a lot of research and, actually not just research, actual data, including by Google itself, to come out with a little bit of a balanced strategy. Google's strategy, which, you and most of our listeners are familiar with, is 70-20-10, which is, 70% of resources on day-to-day operations, 20% on continuous improvement, and then 10% on disruptive innovation. Now, again, they work for a rich industry, a tech industry, when I was at P&G. And then within that, in IT and shared services, which is a very cost constrained. My formula was probably more like 80 and 19 and 1%. But the fact of the matter is that you do need a three-part strategy. And then what you do with that 1% on innovation is you have to be able to very quickly figure out the timing. You cannot just say, I will wait until it gets mature. You have to figure out, what do I play around with, using agile, low cost, high speed innovation and kill ideas and then take the ones that work and then bring them into the company. And that's what you do with that 1%, the third part of the innovation.
Fascinating. As you were speaking about the pace of technology, I don't know if you remember in early 2000, there was this article by a Gartner, analyst. I don't know if you remember that. It kind of set the cat among the pigeons. It went by the name of "It Doesn't Matter," and it really meant IT. So that was this whole thing about, IT doesn't matter, right? Because of, some of the stuff that you said, that you alluded to. But there's always a cost constraint. People are usually looking at it as an infra pipe and stuff like that, right? And I mean, his article was just trying to say that, listen, you know what? Many years back, proximity to the railroads was really the definition of being successful, and then it was about, being, next to the, the electricity, and now it's about just having IT plumbing, right? But I think it's just completely changed, and I think, like you said, it's become
Yes.
front and center, and having to get your head around so many advancements, definitely more advanced in technology than perhaps in your own industry. I mean, it's
Yes.
unbelievable and I think the challenges are really not small right now. Uh, but just moving along, and I think before we get on to the next book, you've nicely articulated a 5-step process about the digital transformation, and what's right. You talked about the last, the mature organization, which is really about being a living DNA, right? And I think in each of these steps, you've talked about 2 or 3 virtues or very important characteristics that's required. So for an organization to be really perceived as a living DNA in the digital transformation, which was a paradigm, you've talked about risk, and then you talked about agility. Maybe you could, just tell us a little more about that, and we can then move on.
Yeah. Just to start with, the 5-stage model, which is called out in the book on why digital transformations fail. The stages go from, basically building up the foundation, which is stage 1, which is actually not even transformation, it is automation,
Right.
to then having, independent silos within the organization, whether it's a government or nonprofit or company starting to, really, really transform the way they work. They do finance and so on and so forth, to essentially having the CEO or the board say, hey, we will be a data organization, a digital company. That's stage 3, to actually completing a one-time change, transforming the way the companies run. That's stage 4. But then
Right.
stage 5, Vivek, which is what you've talked about, that's the nirvana. Because at stage 5, what you have is that the organization and the company self-evolves. So when technology changes, the marketplace changes, they evolve, right? And the example which everybody knows of is Netflix, that started off as a mail-in, DVD kind of company to, then did streaming, and then original programming, to now international programming. And they destroyed their own business 2 or 3 times. They destroyed, first, of course, they destroyed the video store business, but then they destroyed the mail-in business to reinvent themselves and stuff like that. So when you kind of think about it, what does it take for an organization within 20 years to change that much? And the answer is that, the living DNA, the people inside the company demand change. The people inside the company say, we have to do this serving the customer differently, right?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about. So then the question becomes, what does it take to do something like that? And the answer to that is that, hey, look, and it goes back to the point that you're making around the role of IT. You have to understand what is the purpose of your organization, right? So in the case of Netflix, it was essentially providing entertainment. They were not in the DVD business. They were not in the streaming business. They're not in the, movie production business. They are in the entertainment business. And the reward systems of the people, once the person that used to mail in the DVDs understand that they are not in the mailing business, but they're in the entertainment business, and they come up with ideas to say, hey, what if I could help you evolve into streaming or something like that? That's when, you have that change. So it goes back to the start of our interview when you asked about, what has changed, what has not changed. If you can make the reward systems for your employees such that they don't feel threatened by change, that they see this as an advantage, right?
Right.
When you solve the human challenge, that's when you get to that level of maturity.
Lovely. Great stuff. So, with that, moving along to your next book, which is about revolutionizing business operations, you obviously have made a case for why, like we talked about Netflix. I mean, of course, out there was the entire model that had to be changed, the entire business model, not just the operations.
Yes.
But in some ways, you obviously said that as organizations tend to become big, and definitely something of the size of P&G, as it really becomes big, it ends up becoming this gigantic monolith, kind of a monster, right? I mean, you have They become slow. The departments kind of become redundant. Sometimes you just kind of pick up so much baggage along the way. And there's also lack of competitiveness, right? Uh, you've talked about multiple themes, but I think one theme that really stood out for me is when you touch upon this concept of open market rules.
Yes.
And I think you articulated extremely well, saying that, what, just because, an organization makes a product, unfortunately, my ex-employer, Microsoft, when they made Zoom, for example, nobody wanted to
Yeah.
buy that. It was actually
Yes.
a very good product, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody wanted to buy it, in that sense. But, because customer is king, he decides. They don't care about your reputation, about your precedence. It's just you at that point in time, right? But on the other hand, all these internal departments, I mean, they just can throw any product and the internal customers have to have it. I mean, so, if I have a new incentive plan from HR, that's it. If IT is saying this is going to be the new, workflow management system or your payroll management system, that is it. You have to consume it, right? And I think you made a very interesting case that, for these transformative global business services, you have to really think from the paradigm or through the lens of these open market rules. So would love it if you could kind of, just, double down that path. Yeah.
Um, the Zune MP3 player from Microsoft is indeed a good example, and a lot of kudos to Microsoft for actually having coming out with that product, and then also
Right,
knowing when to kill it and move on to something even better.
right.
But that's the power of the open market. So Vivek, like with a lot of the questions that you're asking, you're picking up some really, really thought-provoking questions in there. The open market construct is perhaps the most important thing that, if you're working in a company, in a government or whatever, and you want to improve the efficiency and effectiveness, that's the mindset you want within your organization, right? So if I may back up, I'm a student of history, so I like to put things into historical context always. When
Mm-hmm.
you kind of think about the evolution of companies, right? So, in the early days, it was all about, hey, companies have to collect money, they have to sell, they have to manufacture, so on and so forth. What's the best way of organizing all of this? And the answer is, of course, functions, right? So finance does the money, HR does the people, and so on and so forth. And that's brilliant. And it worked. It still does work. Yeah. But then the challenge becomes what happens when you become large enough? So you go across countries. Do you have multiple finance organizations or HR organizations? What happens when you need to look at work processes that go across order to cash? The salesperson gets the order, the logistics, manages it, the finance person gets the money. How do you then cut across silos? Um, so it's that tension between the job of a function is to do their piece of work extremely well,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it's the job of the company to say, hey, the customer is king. And if I need to change across the company, then I need to do that. That's the tension. Now, historically, a function operates pretty much like a bureaucracy. They lay down the rules. Finance says, hey, this is how you classify debits and credits. Here's the rules of the game. Here's how you choose the who gets paid, and so on and so forth, right? And that's really important because you don't want, 1,000 variations of the debits and credits and how you close your books. But at some point in time, the problem with a bureaucracy is that it gets calcified, it gets slowed in decision making, it does not change and stuff like that. Now, the opposite model of that is the open market system. The open market system, like the MP3 player, says, hey, I may have a great product and pat my back for that, but if the customer doesn't want it, that's it. I have to change. And so, what Procter and Gamble and the work that Filippo and I did, and so on and so forth, is that very simple insight that if your organization, your finance, HR, shared services, IT, global business services organization is structured, is run with not just the mindset, but the work processes of an open market system. If your finance organization feels that they're working for a finance company, the
Mm-hmm.
customer is king. It's, if they're not able to be agile and change their work processes quickly, then they're going to be out of business, right? When you implement that, then you have a long-lasting model. And that's what the book, Revolutionizing Business Operations, is all about. We kind of provide what we call the drivers, the three drivers. And open market rules is one of the three drivers. And then, of course, different stages of maturity on how to get there.
In the book, you've given a very clear, step by step across, I think, accountability, open market,
Yes.
and you've talked about those three and the maturity, right? But what I really enjoyed in the book were the kind of anecdotes that you had kind of sprinkled all across. Like there were some interesting ones, some really unfortunate ones, but you kind of talked about those. And I thought, like, instead of maybe focusing on really the framework, which of course I think anybody who's keen should read this book. It's really a great read. I just wanted to kind of cherry pick three or four of these anecdotes and just discuss them out with you, because I think they really bring out your point extremely well. So I believe when you talked about really the fact that the challenges of organization, staying in silos, I mean, it can be sometimes fatal, to the company. And in the very unfortunate case of the Malaysian Airlines
Yes.
MH370, right? You brought that out very well, So would love you to just talk about that episode. And I just want to similarly touch upon three, four of such, similar ones.
Yeah, no, happy to share some of the stories in there. So let me start with the construct of unified accountability, which is, we were just talking to Vivek about how different function, finance, they may have accountability and responsibility for financial systems and financial processes, data, books, and stuff like that. But then today's world is really multifunctional, right? So, it kind of cuts across, and it is multinational and multi-customer. So the challenge then becomes, when you look at the customer, who's got accountability for outcomes to the customer, if you are so siloed, right? Finance and so on and so forth. And then the question becomes, in a large organization, other than the CEO himself or herself, is there any other point of accountability where it's like the buck stops here? Right?
Yeah.
And that's where I use the example of the airlines industry. Now, I illustrated the unfortunate, Malaysian 370 story, where, your listeners will know that this was the flight that took off from Malaysia and then went missing, and is still missing. It went towards the South Pole and crashed somewhere near Australia. This is a very unfortunate example, but an example of an industry that is incredibly complicated. When you think about the airline industry, you've got literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of entities, governments, airplane manufacturers, air traffic controllers, security contractors in the airports, caterers, pilots, and so on and so forth. But the focus when you travel in an airline is always with the customer, the handoffs and processes. So, for example, when you check in your baggage and you go through security, it's probably, contracted security agents. And then the, check-in people may be contracted or maybe airline employees. But then as you kind of move into the pilot and the plane itself while it is flying, there is a handoff of the passengers to the pilot. And from the pilot, air traffic controllers, one country's air traffic controllers, so Malaysian airspace in the case of MH370 to Vietnam, air traffic controller, those handoffs are absolutely perfect for the most part, with the incident that we're talking about here being the exception.
Right.
And so the point there is that you can have very complex organization structures and unified accountability and low losses in handoff of the process, one step to another. And so that's really an important principle. It's one of the three drivers, like, open market systems or rules is one of the drivers, unified accountability towards the customer, and you can design for it. And using MH370 as an example of the failure, there was the handoff between the air traffic controller in, Malaysia and Vietnam, as the case is there. Now, that's not the root cause. The root cause most likely is a pilot that was determined to end it all and have practiced and stuff like that. But a good handoff would have caught that, right? And so that is the point being made there. Another anecdote that I love is this. small little fish and grocery trading company that started in South Korea a long, long, long time ago,
Hmm.
which now you and I know as Samsung. Um, and I use that as an example of evolution and the importance of innovation, right? Now, how do you go from, fish trading company to essentially being known as one of the top 10 innovative companies in the world, right? And the fact of the matter is that, you do that by, again, focusing on the customer, focusing on, where you can create value to the customer and everything else, your broader organization, your structure, so on and so forth is secondary. And what Samsung does extremely well is, figure out how to get every part of their organization kind of invested in innovation and change, right? A third example, maybe the last one here, that I absolutely love is Amazon. So the evolution of how Amazon introduced Amazon Prime, which is the free shipping service, is a great one.
Right.
When Amazon, this was at a time when, again, this kind of goes way back, but Amazon's biggest competitive threat was eBay because they were both selling products. And eBay was starting to actually beat Amazon. And so what
Hmm.
Jeff Bezos said was, hey, what if we offer free shipping, right? So that's a way to create what he called a moat or
Right.
a protection around the customer so they never have to leave Amazon, right? And so
Right.
they originally started with, okay, free shipping. And then of course, Jeff Bezos kind of took this step further and said free 2-day shipping,
Yeah.
which is really expensive. But let's think about this and the lessons for revolutionizing business operations. At that time, some of Amazon's profitability came from shipping charges.
Hmm.
Now you have the boss that says, um,
Take that out.
I need to, yeah, but I mean, I need to actually not just deliver free shipping, but 2-day shipping, which means it's more expensive shipping, right?
Yeah.
Is he like crazy? And the answer, it's a long-term play because what Bezos was after was creating this moat around the customer
Right.
so that the customer, once they're subscribed to Amazon Prime, finds it very difficult to leave.
Right. Right.
Because now Amazon Prime gets you free videos, it gives you free delivery, it gives you, partly Amazon free music, so on and so forth. You never leave Amazon, right?
That's true.
And so customer obsession, which is the point that I make in the book, is the important lesson out of this. We have companies that talk about customer centricity.
Right.
Vivek wants me to do something, so I will be customer centric. That's fine. Amazon takes it a step further. They say customer obsession. In the short
Right.
term, even if it hurts us, by
Yeah.
being obsessed by Vivek, we will always win with Vivek. So these are some of the stories that we talk about in the book.
Lovely. Some great, stories around that. So moving around to the next one, you've also talked about just the way you've talked about the customer obsession and customer centricity. You've also talked about, some great product management. I mean, and if you really think about it, some of the most iconic, should I say, CEOs of our time are actually people who probably are great super product managers. I think the name that really stands out, while you've been kind enough to mention Bill Gates in the same breath, and of course, he had this flair, this intuition about which product. I think in the early days of Microsoft, when it kind of spun from just being an OS to kind of building this whole, the moat of, Word and PowerPoint, and actually some of them are bought out, right? I mean, not really built. But I think the name really that stands out is Steve Jobs. His obsession for not only the product but also the entire operation, and I think we see that whole thing continuing. I mean, Apple just launched the Vision Pro, and people have been completely floored by that. I mean, no matter it costs you around $3,500, but the product is great, right? So some thoughts on that. I mean, why product management and that obsession of product management is really important, and that's what you've observed with Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Dell, so on and so forth.
Um, you know, uh, Product management is really at the heart of what we talked about earlier, which is the free market system.
Mhm.
When you're a product manager, you have unified accountability type of mindset. Buck stops with me. I need
I
to
think that's probably the
understand
best example of unified, accountability. I mean,
exactly,
when yeah, exactly.
exactly. And you're exactly right. I mean, all of these visionaries, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, you know, um, many, many, many others, they were product managers first. Elon Musk, Bezos in
Yeah,
today's world, they were product
Zuckerberg, you could
managers
add.
first.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, absolutely, absolutely. They were product managers first. What they had is the intuitive ability to understand, how to win with the customer. But it did not end there. So,
Mhm.
you could argue that Steve Jobs was a designer, and he was, of course, that was his passion. But he was more than that. He understood how to offer the right product at the right price, at the right design, at the right execution. I mean, Apple today, it evolved under Steve Jobs as well, is the world's best supply chain company,
Yeah,
right? In
absolutely.
addition to, of course, being a design company and so on and so forth. So all of these guys knew how to bring together all of the aspects of getting a successful experience to you, Vivek, right? And so that product management mindset is really important. And we all recognize the examples of iPhones and stuff like that. Where the book gets into product management is then we take the very, very boring day-to-day jobs in the companies of, payroll and, closing the books, finance, or IT, and say, are you a order taker or are you a product manager? Are you a bureaucrat that says this is the standard IT system that you must use, dear
Hmm.
user? Or are you a product manager to the user saying, I need to do whatever I can to give you the best value proposition so I don't have to force you any longer, that you will
Right.
actually want to use my product, right? And so we use that as a construct to build, again, this design of open market models and unified accountability so that common people like you and I that might run payroll in organizations suddenly start to say that, no, 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 we have a lot of power. We can bring together the same creativity and the understanding that we are actually playing a very cool role inside the company to attract users to our product.
No, great points. And that brings me to the third anecdote, which I really liked. We have a lot of organization, which, especially in today's day and age, which talk about transparency, because I think the whole thing about being very visibly accountable, is and now especially in the world of social media. I mean, it's very important that if you don't do this in a good way, it can be really brutal for you, for your stock price, for your reputation in the market, right? You've touched upon examples like T-Mobile, Patagonia, and the legendary investor Ray Dalio, who, by the way, is really written this amazing book, The Changing World Order. I mean,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
and it's so yeah, you've talked about transparency, and I think it'd be great to talk about it. What's transparency doing in a book about business operations?
yeah. As with a lot of these anecdotes that, Vivek, you and I have been talking about, the airlines, the Amazon, Samsung, and so on and so forth. We're using these examples of Patagonia and others to make a point, right?
Yeah,
And then to bring it to life with our actual experience, Filippo and mine, of 70 collective years of, having implemented these, right? Um, so, let's back up a little bit and talk about, Patagonia and others. So, Patagonia is legendary in this particular case. They are a clothing manufacturer, outdoor clothing manufacturer,
yeah,
and their founder, Yves Chauvinard, he basically ran a full page ad in the New York Times on the day before Thanksgiving sales, which is the largest
yeah,
retail day in the
yeah.
US, saying, don't buy this jacket, his own jacket. And he went on to explain that they had recently found that they were not paying their suppliers fairly. And then the practices there of non-sustainable
Hmm.
manufacturing worried him. Yeah.
Hmm.
So think about it. Even in today's world, which manufacturer is going to go put out an ad saying, please don't buy my product, right? Um, and that too in the most important sales day, right?
Right.
Um, Now, what he found out was every time you owned up to a mistake and you were transparent and you honestly did a good job of trying to improve yourselves, sales always goes up. So that's the lesson on transparency, right? Our natural tendency is to get defensive and argumentative. It's like, what are you talking about? Oh, no, no. It's like those were supplier organizations. I don't have anything to do with them. They may be doing something that I don't know about. But instead saying, no, I own it. I will fix it. And in the meantime, don't buy this. Um,
Mm.
that's incredible. Now, how does that relate to revolutionizing business operations? The principle of transparency equally applies to internal functions, back to my finance, HR, IT kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
How good are we to owning up to our mistakes as opposed to getting defensive? How good are we at trying to figure out, hey, I must attract my users and my, internal business partners to my product. So, if my service goes down for 1 minute, I will personally own it. I will take the blame. Even if a user put in wrong data, I will take the blame and say, no, this is my system. I own the outcomes. How good are we really at that? Right? And the answer is we're not. And so one of the disciplines, one of the maturity drivers that we talk about is it's really important to identify outcome metrics and to own
Mm.
them. Even if the input comes, garbage in, garbage out, we say, but even if the input is garbage, we must own the output
Right.
and we must take blame when the output is not up to standards, right? And that's how you build credibility in the organization and build a reputation. And as the case of Patagonia shows, you know you will be even more successful when you actually take accountability.
Your comments about this accountability, about being very public with apology, and really being focused on the outcome, because at the end of the day, it's about outcome, kind of takes me back to an episode which happened in the US just last week, right? You had the Senate hearing for yet another Senate hearing for Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg was there. And I think this was all, the whole discussion was around the repeatment or the modification of the Section 230, which covers, all these technology platforms, which kind of currently gives them some kind of protection from whatever's happening out there, right?
Yes.
And in the middle of that, they basically, I mean, I think the whole focus is very bipartisan. You're really senators from both sides, after him. And at the end of it all, Mark Zuckerberg actually got up, turned around,
Yeah.
looked into the parents' eyes, and he said, listen, I'm sorry that we haven't been able to protect your children, because obviously the cases of cyberbullying and,
Yeah.
sexual harassment has led to some really unfortunate, deaths out there, right? Uh, but the fact of the matter is, this is the same company which employs 40,000 employees focused around content moderation.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
40,000. I mean, that's a big
Yes.
number for any company to be doing that. And you will always have some edge cases which will come through, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, I think his some people said it's just a show or whatever. But no, I just thought it was pretty humbling, and it was pretty brave of him to kind of sign up and do that. Any thoughts on that? I'm sure it must have got a lot of cover
I
out there.
do. You're touching upon, one of my heart button issues, specifically with social media and Facebook in particular, and these days with Twitter,
Right.
and so on and so forth. So I do think it was good of Mark Zuckerberg to actually own up and to apologize. And how much of that was truly heartfelt and how much of this
Sure.
was, a marketing show is hard to tell. But you know, the good part of me wants to believe that at least a part of it was genuine. right?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
the reason that this is a hot button issue is because I have been very openly critical of Facebook and
Hmm.
Mark Zuckerberg over the years, in essentially taking the position that, hey, we're just a service provider. We cannot own the outcome of what happens. In fact, I unsubscribed this very small protest, but from Facebook, literally about 5, 6 years ago,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
encouraged people to get out because I said, hey, with great power comes great responsibility. If you don't own the outcomes, then
Right.
the fact of the matter is only you have the power to figure out the outcomes. You cannot say this is not my problem, right? And so to give credit where credit is due, at least he's taken the first step of saying, you
Yeah.
know, I apologize. And hopefully that turns into actions where he does more than that. Um, so I did think that that was important and good. Um, and these days now I take aim at a different company, Twitter's, which is actually walking away from content moderation to say, hey, let's
Right.
just do a free for all. And then, this is like, we talked about the open market. This is the downside of the open market, which is,
Right.
a free for all. And an open market is not a free for all. There are still rules in an open market, right? It's a little bit like saying, hey, let's all trust car owners to do the right thing because it's an open market. It's like, no, it's not an open market. There's always rules. When it comes to powerful tools, and an automobile is a powerful tool because it can cause
Right.
harm. So, and Twitter has walked away from that, which is a problem. And so I think they deserve condemnation for that. But it's really important, for us as technology professionals to understand
Hmm.
the rules of the game, right?
Right.
You know, we are privileged. We have privileges, um, but then privileges come with some responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're just running a server, it's a privilege. It also comes with responsibility. Don't run it in such a manner that it causes harm somewhere else, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's important to live by that principle. So that's why I thought it was a really good question, Vivek. Thank you for that.
Right. Now, I would actually love to double down this point, but I think we're on the hour right now. I think because this whole topic is extremely nuanced in a way, because there are obviously people who are saying that he's not doing enough, and in some cases, people are actually in defense saying that, listen, end of the day, he's doing the best that he can, and you know what, you should probably be thinking about passing on the responsibility of who gets access to a smartphone in the first place. I mean, that starts with the parents. I mean, like if a child is getting bullied in school, you don't go and say that the school has to shut down, right? I mean, you obviously kind of do the intervention and whatever. And so there, like I said, it's going to be a very nuanced debate, and it's almost been to that. But I just want to kind of wind down in the next 5, 7 minutes, if it's okay with you.
Oh, yes.
It's been wonderful chatting with you, and I think everybody out here must have been really enjoying the life lessons that your journey has had. So please indulge us for a bit more time on this, Tony. Uh, you know, I think I just want to touch upon. I think one of your other interesting topic is really about the future of work, right? I mean, you've in some places you've talked about the fact that how things will transform. We want things to remain the way they are, but work from home has happened, and humans will always stay at the center of this whole employment debate, right? But you know what? Sometimes you look at the kind of transformation that AI has brought in right now. The kind of I mean, we talked about software eating the world, we talked about digital eating the world, but AI is literally eating the jobs right now.
Yes. Yes.
And so, what's your take on this, given that perspective?
So, there's been a lot of research done, and I am part of it. I'm part of, one of the teams at MIT that works on the future of work. The the fact of the matter is that the power equation between the employer and the employee, shifted irretrievably during COVID, right?
Right.
But it was a long time coming. This isn't a COVID story. The fact of the matter is, this is basically how work gets done, how, products get manufactured, how economies work, right? in the old days, the 9 to 5 was really important because work got done physically, and then you needed people, in specific locations, and then tracking absenteeism and stuff like that was important, right? And then when work moved from physical to knowledge economies, that connection was loosened. It didn't completely break. And
Mhm.
then over a period of time, the fact of the matter is, while the HR rules and regulations are 5 days a week in the office, or, absenteeism and stuff like that are still in place, the reality is not matching up to those rules. So, where is this all going? First and foremost, I think the human resources, the people organization, is in the midst of a revolution itself, right? They need to figure out, thanks to technology, thanks to AI, thanks to, so on and so forth, what are the new rules of the game and the employee equation, the employee relationship, right? The employee value proposition, right? If you get too rule-based, you have to come to work 3 days a week, and the employee feels that this is unreasonable, they will not. Right? And the same is true then when you take it to an extreme around AI. Of course, as with every revolution, the second industrial revolution with the textile manufacturing and stuff like that, there will be losses of jobs. It's a given. That's what happens during industrial revolutions. Unfortunately, there are winners and there are losers, right? What HR functions, what CEOs, what people like you and me can do is, to the extent possible, we can minimize the pain. There will be pain, but it can be minimized through planning, through putting in place new rules of the game and stuff like that. Right? Um, we can decide, what are the kind of things that are absolutely necessary and plan ahead. So if you are going to lose 50% of our population, rather than waiting until the last minute and firing people, can you retrain people? Can you place them? Can you, do smart people management, right? And that's really the implication. It's inevitable. But, again, you have to take accountability for the change and you have to do the right thing by people.
No, great points, Tony. I mean, this was really fantastic. I think the hour just flew by, and I think before you go, I just want to ask one last question from the community. I think it's a very interesting one. He says, Tony, which industry join from an innovation perspective? Is your favorite company? Which is the company that you respect? And I would actually like to expand on that. Say, let's say, from innovation, from the digital transformation that you've talked about in your book, from the business process revolution. Which are the company that you would name? Maybe outside of PNG.
Well, you took away my favorite answer. No, seriously, my answer is going to be very, very boring. It is Amazon.
Mhm.
It is Amazon. And the reason for that is because I think, um, um, more than anything else, the customer obsession, their braveness in fighting, um, industrial systems, even Wall Street, to say, we will not generate a profit for the first X number of years. And
Sure.
if you don't like it, that's too bad, right?
Yeah.
And they fought Wall Street and successfully won with
Mhm.
Wall Street. They have obviously transformed their business model several times, and they still are innovative. They're not perfect, of course, but I think they are showing the way, not just in retail, but in the way businesses can evolve and they can transform and they can take on powerful forces and they can still, win against powerful forces. So it's a case study. It's one of my favorite case studies.
Wonderful. So Tony, this was really fantastic. I think it was a great learning. I think if you could just maybe go down to the community chat room, you'll just see people really asking a lot of questions. I couldn't pick them all up. And, there's Rijita, who's again, I know is dialing from the USA. Love the discussion around customer obsession and accountability. So I think with that, Tony, thank you so much. And the next time you're in Mumbai, I need you to sign this coffee. So we need to meet up for that.
Oh, my
Thanks so much.
pleasure. Now, I look forward to seeing you in Mumbai. Vivek, this has been a real pleasure. Like I said, You asked some really penetrating and really important questions. We covered a lot of ground. And to the community, I want to say, hey, the great thing about what you've got at Thinkly here is, not just incredible, learning opportunities, but the positive approach to, yes, there's a lot of change, but every change is a positive opportunity. So let's grab a hold of it. Vivek, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Likewise, sir. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too. Okay.